Most of you probably have no idea who I am, and that's because I work for BBD in Cape Town. A little bit about me just before we get going. I am pretty new at BBD. I've been here for about a year and a half. I started last year in the grad program. Before that, I studied at UCT. Specifically, I studied information systems. I tend to be a bit conceptual, a bit philosophical at times, so please forgive me for that. If I do get too philosophical, feel free to come and give me a flick on the ear. I'll try and get back to it. I love data. I think data is absolutely awesome, and I think we need to start thinking about data a little bit differently, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. 50 million tweets are being tweeted out every single day. 20 hours of video is being uploaded to YouTube every single minute, and Google is processing 24 petabytes of data daily. IBM did a little bit of a study, and that's where this infographic came from, where they estimated that we are producing 2.5 quintillion bytes of data daily. With an estimated growth rate of 40%, by 2020, that's going to be 45 zettabytes of data a year. It's incomprehensible, really. I mean, all of that just doesn't really mean much to us. So today, we're going to explore the concept behind this term, the data deluge. It's a buzzword, just as the buzzword is of big data. I hope that collectively, we can, as individuals, start to think about data a little bit differently and start to become a more data-conscious, data-driven community. So there's three key areas that I want to talk to you about today. What is the data deluge and what is big data? How do we use it and how does it affect us? And lastly, and most importantly, why the hell should we be using it and embracing it? But let's start with big data. I'm pretty sure everyone here has heard the term. It's a big buzzword. Does anyone feel confident enough to give me a definition of big data? Got a few prizes here if anyone? No? Okay, there we go. We've got some takers. So.
There are many definitions, but one of them is it's actually more data than you know what to do with your current tools.
I like that a lot. Very much. Would you want to? That was not supposed to happen. There we go. Do you want to give another one? Want to have a go? Yeah, you had your hand up.
It's more data than you're able to process on any one device.
Okay. I mean, I feel like you copied him a little bit. I don't know if that's worthy of a bag. So I like the fact that you mentioned more data than we're able to handle. As you said, there's a lot of different definitions, and I think that's the problem with the term like big data. The term has become very disillusioned. It doesn't really mean as much as it should. But let's think of big data, as the explosion in quantity and sometimes quality of available and potentially relevant data, just for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about today. There's 5 key things that we talk about when we talk about big data. Volume, how much. Velocity, how quickly is it being created. Variety, what different sources is it coming from? Veracity, how accurate, how trustworthy is that data? And lastly, and for me most importantly, value. What can we actually get from it? Unfortunately, the concept of the data deluge is a little bit more difficult to define. I did some research on this when I was at UCT, and I was lucky enough to speak to a number of CIOs and business intelligence specialists at a couple of the biggest financial services organizations in South Africa. When I first mentioned the term to them, none of them really knew what the hell I was on about. But they're pretty intelligent people, I would hope. So we were kind of able to together form a bit of a definition, and it goes something like this. The data deluge, specifically in the context of financial services organization, is the explosion in high volume, high velocity big data, which results in a disconnect between an organization's knowledge of what they currently know and what they could potentially find out. But let's break that up because it was quite a mouthful. High volume, high velocity big data. We just defined big data, kind of. A large amount of potentially useful information or insight, and often this is in the form of unstructured data. And thirdly, and I think most importantly, what my friend over there mentioned, the inability to evaluate this information or data. So why can't we evaluate it? Well, the problem is that we're often using traditional or historical, if I dare say that, means of handling and processing data. Things like centralized database architecture, which can often become costly and inefficient when we're talking about massive data sets. Structured query language, SQL, is great for what it's used for, but not great when we're talking about semi-structured and unstructured data sources. And lastly, Traditional ETL processes using data warehouses and data marts really just don't work that well for our new types of data and new sources of data. Luckily, things are changing really quickly, as we saw in the brilliant keynote. And there's a lot of new tools, techniques, and technologies which are helping us embrace data in a completely new way. Firstly, I'd like to talk about data lakes. Who's worked with a data lake before? Anyone? AWS, I know they use awesome stuff in terms of data lakes. Data lakes are great for handling these new types of data because they allow us to store structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data as is. They use NoSQL database software such as Hadoop, and they allow us flexibility to manage and analyze combinations of data as well. This really helps us solve the infrastructure problem which I was talking about earlier, the centralized database architecture. And it really is a great way for us to carry on using new types of data, new sources of data collectively to garner absolutely awesome new sources of insights. So we've kind of solved a little bit of the infrastructure problem. So how do we actually use this data? Well, there's a lot of cool tools like text analytics and natural language processing. Text analytics has a number of different ways in which it can be used. I find the most interesting is sentiment analysis and explicative analysis. Now, sentiment analysis allows us to take unstructured data sources and form insight into the high-level sentiment, or feeling of what people think or saying. A great application of this is in Twitter feed analytics. I met somebody once who managed to develop a machine learning system that took Twitter feeds and formed a correlation between performances on the JSE and people's sentiment. It was absolutely awesome. And it just goes to show how the use cases for text analytics can be vast. Explicative analysis takes the sentiment and tries to form a high-level understanding or reasoning behind it. This is kind of similar to the other side of the same coin to natural language processing. Natural language processing is a really interesting technique of mining information from unstructured data sources. There's potentially awesome use cases for it in business specifically, in collecting and summarizing documents and information that we have in documents. Think of things like emails, memos, policies, regulations, all of that kind of stuff can be really useful to us if we are able to kind of mine and extract the information we need out of it. You should look out for Rory's talk later today. He's talking the Dev Plus track. He goes into quite a lot of detail of natural language processing, how it works and what some of the issues are with it, of course with a bit of a Rory twist. And something else that he talks about specifically with natural language processing is machine learning. Machine learning has allowed for the unbelievable automation in the handling of huge data sets. Has anybody heard of OpenAI? No? OpenAI is a non-profit research company that was started by Elon Musk and Sam Altman. They do some really cool stuff over there, but one of the more recent projects is called OpenAI 5. They developed a team of 5 neural networks, or bots, to play a video game called Dota 2, which I'm sure some of you have heard about. Dota 2 is a very complex. It's renowned for being a very complex game because of the complex real-time environment. There's infinite outcome possibilities based on the actions of all 10 players together with the game environment. Now, this team of 5 neural networks, or bots, played 180 years of the game against itself. And the team was able to beat a team of 5 professional human players quite convincingly recently. Now, why is this relevant? Well, OpenAI's goal here was to exceed the capabilities of humans in this complex video game because the complexity of the game environment really is a great example of the messiness and ever-changing realities that is the real world. So they wanted to prove that if the bots can beat people in the game, surely they can eventually exceed human capability in the real world. I think that's a really cool example of how machine learning is helping us manage massive explosive data sets that are ever changing and ever arriving. How do we actually use these tools and technologies at such a huge scale, though? That's where fields like quantum computing come into the picture. Now, IBM, Microsoft, and Google, they are all competing to be the kings of the quantum computing mound. IBM say that in the next 14 months, they're going to be able to produce, or will have produced, a 20-qubit general-purpose quantum computer. That's unbelievable. It will allow us to take machine learning and text analytics and language processing to a whole new level, with all sorts of new data sources being able to be gathered and analyzed. Now, as you can see from this picture, there's a huge, vast amount of use cases for quantum computing, things like quantum simulation, quantum encryption and decryption, so security purposes and stuff. But the use cases for machine learning are what I find really interesting. In fields like finance, autonomous vehicles, medicine and healthcare, and pretty much anything you can think of, quantum computing is going to make a difference. If we look at Gartner's hype cycle for quantum computing, though, there's a bit of an issue here. We see that quantum computing is only really in its innovation stage. And they say that it'll only really reach its plateau of productivity within the next 10 years. Compare that to some technology like machine learning, which is on its way to becoming really useful and really productive in everyday application. So the moral of the story here is that our capabilities of analyzing, collecting, and using massive data sets is increasing really quickly. And it's really important for us that we keep our mindset up with the way that the technology is changing. The key thing to also keep in mind is, how does this affect our organizations, right? Regardless of the organizational structure of our projects or our organizations that we work for, we are all decision makers in one way or another. It's really important that we keep our mindset up with the way that things are changing and the way that we are making decisions on a day-to-day basis. Now, Intel did a little bit of a study where they looked at some of the issues and obstacles with big data analytics, and I thought it was quite relevant here. The first thing that we see right at the top is a shortage of skilled professionals. And at BBD, we know the importance of expertise and of hiring and procuring the right people. But we also know how difficult that can be. So when we're thinking about data implementations at any level, we really need to make sure that we have the right human resources and the right capabilities to actually achieve what we are to achieve. The next thing that they mention is security concerns and unmanageable data rates. Now, what kind of data enthusiast would I be if I didn't mention the regulatory elephant in the room, the GDPR, or the EU's General Data Protection Regulation? Now, the GDPR aims to protect its citizens from privacy and data breaches in an ever-increasing data-driven world. It's really not a joke. It was implemented earlier this year in May, and they claim that any organization who fails to meet the requirements of the GDPR will have to pay a fine of 4% of their global turnover, or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. So they really don't want people to be messing around with this stuff. It's applied in a number of rights for EU citizens, but I'm not going to go into much detail about it. There's a few things that I think are really interesting. First of all, breach notification. So companies and organizations are given 72 hours after they find any data breaches to notify their customers or clients. Right to access. All of us, or EU citizens, have the right to ask any organization if they're keeping any personal information about us, and they have the right to access a copy of this personal information at their request. The third point I want to talk about is the right to be forgotten. I think this one's really interesting, specifically because of how social media companies like Facebook, for example, is treating our personal information. With a lot of these social media accounts, you store a lot of your personal info on there, and deactivating your account really doesn't remove any of that information historically. But now with the GDPR, they're saying that any information that you store, you have personal information that is, you have the right to get it completely deleted and erased from the servers of that organization. The last point I want to talk about with the GDPR is one of the rights, which is privacy by design. I think as a developer, I find this one really interesting because Basically, what it's telling us is that it's not only the analysts, the product owners, and the business people who need to be thinking about this kind of stuff. It's us developers at the lowest level. Privacy by design states that privacy measures should not be built into our systems as an afterthought, but they should be something that we include in the absolute lowest level of design as we're creating and building these systems. So I'm sure you're wondering, what the hell does this have to do with us, right? I mean, this is the EU's GDPR and we sitting in South Africa. Well, they claim that it's globally enforceable. Now, how effective that global enforcement is, that's a debate for another day. But the fact of the matter is that they're making a concerted effort to globally enforce rights for people in terms of privacy. There's also a little thing called POPI, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, the Protection of Private Information Act, which, although it's not as groundbreaking as the GDPR is, it's on the right track to improving the privacy of our personal information within South Africa. And I think as countries start to adopt more and more policies like the GDPR, it's just a matter of time before POPI starts to become more and more aligned with those kind of ideals. So it's not just data privacy that we have to think about when we're talking about all these new types of data sources and data implementations. Security is a key area of it. These are some of the key areas that we need to think about when we're thinking about data security. I've already spoken about data privacy previously, but infrastructure is something that these days can often be forgotten, especially with the introduction of cloud services as one of the core components of our infrastructure nowadays. It's easy to forget about security concerns when we are just kind of palming off the infrastructure side of things to AWS and Azure. But as we know, we hear about data breaches and hacks almost every single week in huge organizations and even governments sometimes. So it's really something that we need to keep in mind when we are making these kind of decisions. Another thing I want to mention in terms of our infrastructure security is risk management. We all need to be conscious of the risks that we're taking with the data, regardless of what level we are in our organization or in our project. Now, data management and integrity and reactive security I've kind of coupled into one, because I think there's three key things that we need to think about when we're handling these. Authentication, authorization, and auditing. They're not massively exciting, but they are massively important. We know what authentication is. We need to make sure that the right people have access to the right stuff. And that leads me to authorization. We need to manage our file systems carefully so as not to get data into the hands of the wrong people. Auditing is also really important. All the auditing systems that we integrate need to make sure that they are reactive and include really appropriate flagging. Machine learning, as somebody, I think Mike mentioned it earlier, or Rory, is a great way that this is being improved, and it's really something that a lot of people need to start thinking about and not just as an afterthought. It's a little bit boring though. What about something like social media? How does this affect us? How many people here use more than 3 types of social media? Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter? 2, only 3. I'm sure you all do. The point being here is that we are getting an overwhelming amount of information every single day about ourselves, our family, our friends, our organizations, and even random celebrities. To be fair, most of this is probably not relevant, but I argue that a lot of it actually is. We're experiencing a data deluge on our phones every single day. But how does this affect our organizations? A CIO I once spoke to told me that he spends 30 to 60 minutes of his allocated workday going through relevant stuff on social media. All of this kind of information is vital to our success, and it has the ability to create absolutely awesome new types of value for us. But why should we actually embrace all of this data? Well, the key is in that word value. Now, value is a little bit of a vague term, and it probably means 10 different things to the 10 different people sitting here in front of me. Rory's idea of value and Gus's idea of value, I think, are probably very different. But let's think of it as an assessment of trade-offs between benefits and sacrifices. So how do we judge value when we're trying to decide on some kind of data implementation? Well, here's a couple of pointers to help us out. We have to ask ourselves, does it actually provide useful information? Is the information that we're going to garner from this data going to be useful to us in the end? You know, we're a software company. There's no use for us looking at the car sales in Saudi Arabia. You know, what's that going to actually do for us? Does it improve the fidelity of the information we already have? So is this new data going to actually improve the accuracy of the stuff that we already know? And lastly, does it improve the timeliness of our response? So will this data actually be useful to us to improve our customer experience at the end of the day? So we know how to judge whether something's going to be valuable or not, but how do we actually achieve value once we decide to go with this data implementation? And here are another 3 little pointers. Focus on the biggest value opportunities. So, you know, there's a lot of aspects to these huge data sets that we can find useful, but focus on the biggest one first to get the biggest value output. It seems obvious, right? Next of all, start with the questions, not data. Often organizations start analyzing data without actually knowing what they want to achieve. Ask the questions first, hypothesize, and use the data to hone in and find the answers to your questions. Lastly, build parts but plan the whole. You know, as we just saw, technology is changing at a really rapid pace. We cannot get stuck on one tool, one technology to handle all of our data, to handle all of our analysis when things are changing really quickly. We should be agile in adopting things as they change to help us be as efficient and as effective as possible. But we need to be careful that we plan this change really carefully. So let's talk about data monetization. Data monetization was previously just known as how much people were willing to pay for data, right? Look at WhatsApp. When WhatsApp was sold, it was sold on the premise of it wasn't making any money, but its database of personal information was worth a hell of a lot. This has kind of changed a little bit. People have started to think about data a little bit differently, though. It's now being thought more of a way of leveraging data to generate value, right? And there's 2 types of value that we talk about here: monetary value and customer value. Monetary value refers to things like return on investment, bottom line profit, but it's more than that. Data is an asset with expanding and decreasing values. It's got tangible goodwill that it offers to our organizations. Customer value can also be broken up into 2 parts. Desired value and perceived value. Desired value refers to what people want when they're getting something, and perceived value refers to what people have found to get once they're using something. But let's get back to monetary value. So there's a number of ways in which we can harness monetary value out of data. The Institute for Analytics says that organizations using the power of data will see $430 billion in productivity over the organizations which aren't. Data really does have the ability to transform operational business decision-making. As an example, Walmart was able to achieve a 10 to 15% increase in online sales by using big data analytics. This resulted in $1 billion in incremental revenue. But data doesn't only have the ability to make us money, it can also save us money. Amazon, as a great example, used big data technologies and have been using big data technologies for years to improve the efficiency of their actions. The supply chain and business process efficiencies that big data can predict for us are unbelievable. And Amazon has really taken advantage of this to become the kings of online retail. But big data does more than this as well. It improves the effectiveness of our business processes. The oil and gas industry are an amazing example here, where they were able to use predictive analytics to reduce the downtime of their machinery by up to 36%. Now that's a huge saving in an industry that relies on the efficiency and effectiveness of their machinery to make money. But data is not only relevant in making money for the retail and production industries. One of the other CIOs I spoke to mentioned that in his asset management organization, sales consultants cost 9 Rand 20 per minute of talk time. Now, we know that data has the ability to hone us in on what customers already want, and can thus improve and reduce the amount of time that sales consultants are needed to be on the phone for. And that kind of brings me to more of the intangible stuff, the customer value in value-added services. I don't really like this term value-added services. It kind of makes me think of some software sales advert trying to sell me a point-of-sale system or something. But it's a very important word because it's quite accurate, actually. A great example of how data has helped us improve our value-added services offering is the way in which banks began to provide online banking. It was not too long ago that online bank transfers were the exception rather than the norm. But as internet availability grew in this country, the banks quickly realized the value not only for themselves, but for their customers as well in offering online banking. Nowadays, I can log into my bank just by looking at my phone. There's more to it than that, though. There's also the feel-good effect. I like this term because it's about knowing what customers want before they do. It really allows us to make customers feel good and make customers feel excited for being a part of our organization. Which kind of leads me to brand loyalty. Now, brand loyalty is not just a buzzword. It's what turns our customers into advocates. And where better do we see this than our very own BBD marketing team? They drive and continue to drive a positive perception of the BBD brand by getting all of us involved on a day-to-day basis. Now, how does data help us here? Well, data can help us compile richer consumer data, which allows us to personalize our offerings to our customers. By marrying the various forms of data that we have in the different sources, like social media, for example, which I think is a really important one here, we really are able to drive this personalization and drive this engagement to a whole nother level. Big data has the ability to answer a lot of marketers' questions of what are customers doing and why are customers doing what they're doing. But it's more than this. It's more than just understanding our customers. Big data and data in general has the ability to provide clear competitive and strategic advantages. To grow, we need to outshine our competitors in flexibility and delivery. And what better way to gain market share than to better understand ourselves, our competitors, our clients, and our potential clients? And the key word there is understand. It all boils down to having the knowledge to make the right decisions. So I hope that I've, in some way, been able to kind of get you guys thinking a little bit about how data can change the way we think on a day-to-day basis. We don't have to be the decision makers at the highest level to be thinking about different data implementations. So let's all start thinking about data a little bit differently. Not as a secondary service to the systems that we're designing, but as a crucial factor to the systems that we are creating, building, and designing together. Thank you very much.